Vincent Hayes stood on the balcony of the grand ballroom, overlooking the glittering charity gala below. His reflection in the glass showed a man who had everything: a tech empire worth billions, a face that graced magazine covers, and a reputation for being untouchable. At 34, he had conquered the business world and believed there was nothing left that could challenge him. Admiring yourself again? Derek Stone appeared beside him, champagne glass in hand. Derek ran a rival tech company, and the two men had been competing since their university days. Where Vincent was cold and calculated, Derek was charming and reckless. Vincent smirked without looking at him. "Just counting the zeros in my net worth. How are your quarterly earnings looking?" Derek laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Always about the money with you. Tell me something, Vincent. Have you ever done anything that wasn't calculated? Anything that actually scared you?" "Fear is for people who have something to lose," Vincent replied, finally turning to face his rival. "I win because I'm willing to risk everything." "Prove it." Derek's eyes gleamed with mischief. "I'll bet you $1 million that you can't handle one simple challenge." Vincent's interest was piqued. He lived for competition, and Derek knew exactly how to bait him. "Name it. Marry someone ordinary. Not one of these society women who want your money or status. Someone real, someone who wouldn't normally give you a second glance." Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "And you have to stay married for 1 full year. No divorce, no separation, no buying your way out." "That's it?" Vincent laughed. "You're making this too easy." "There's one more condition," Derek added. "I choose the woman." Vincent paused. This changed things, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Fine. Show me who you have in mind." Derek turned his phone around, displaying a photo of a woman standing in front of a small bookshop. She had warm brown eyes, dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail, and wore a cardigan that had probably seen better days. She was smiling at someone off-camera, and there was something genuine in her expression that Vincent rarely saw in his world. "This is Rosalie Bennett. She owns a little bookshop in the old quarter of the city. Her grandmother raised her after her parents died. She volunteers teaching kids to read on weekends. She's kind, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by men like us." Derek grinned. 1 year married to her, and you keep your pride intact, you win $1 million. Vincent studied the photo. Rosalie was pretty in an understated way, but more importantly, she represented everything he usually avoided: simplicity, authenticity, emotional connection. The challenge intrigued him. Deal. The next day, Vincent found himself standing outside a bookshop called Stories and Dreams. The building was old but well-maintained, with window boxes full of flowers and a hand-painted sign. Inside, he could see rows of used books and comfortable reading chairs. It was so far removed from his world of steel and glass that he almost felt like he'd traveled to another planet. A bell chimed as he entered. Rosalie was helping a young boy reach a book on a high shelf. When she turned and saw Vincent in his expensive suit, her expression remained neutral. "Can I help you find something?" she asked politely. "Rosalie Bennett." Vincent extended his hand. "I'm Vincent Hayes. I have a business proposition for you." She didn't take his hand immediately, studying him with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through his polished exterior. "I know who you are. Your company bought out 3 blocks in the East District last year. What kind of business would you have with a bookshop owner?" Vincent was surprised she knew about his deals. Most people in her position wouldn't pay attention to corporate acquisitions. "I'd like to discuss it somewhere private. Perhaps dinner at—" "The coffee shop next door is fine," Rosalie interrupted. "I have story time with the children in an hour." They sat in the small coffee shop, and Vincent laid out his proposal. He was honest about the bet, about the year-long marriage, about the contractual nature of it all. He expected her to be outraged or to demand more money. Instead, Rosalie listened quietly, her fingers wrapped around a simple ceramic mug. "Why would I agree to this?" she finally asked. "I'll pay you $500,000. You can expand your bookshop, help more children, secure your future." Vincent had researched her financial situation. The bookshop barely broke even. This money could transform her life. Rosalie was quiet for a long moment, and Vincent couldn't read her expression. Finally, she spoke. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." I keep working at my bookshop. I continue my volunteer work. You don't interfere with my life outside of whatever public appearances this arrangement requires. And after 1 year, we walk away cleanly." "Agreed," Vincent said quickly, relieved it had been so easy. "One more thing," Rosalie added, her eyes meeting his directly. "Don't expect me to pretend to be something I'm not." "I won't change for you or your world," Vincent smiled confidently. "I wouldn't dream of asking you to." But as he left the coffee shop, he had no idea that Rosalie had her own reasons for accepting his proposal. Reasons that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a debt he didn't even know he owed. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in a small courthouse ceremony. Vincent wore a designer suit. Rosalie wore a simple cream dress she'd owned for years. There were no guests except Derek, who served as witness, and Rosalie's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who cried throughout the brief ceremony. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent leaned in for the obligatory kiss. Rosalie allowed it, but her lips were cool and distant. "It was a transaction, nothing more. Welcome to the game," Derek whispered to Vincent as they signed the marriage certificate. "Let's see if you can actually win this one." Vincent drove Rosalie to his mansion in the hills that evening. The house was modern, all glass and steel, with a view of the entire city. He watched her face as they pulled through the gates, expecting some reaction to the obvious wealth. But Rosalie simply looked out the window with the same calm expression she'd worn all day. "The staff will show you to your room," Vincent said as they entered the massive foyer. "We'll maintain separate spaces, of course. This is just a business arrangement." "Of course," Rosalie agreed. A housekeeper named Patricia showed Rosalie to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was massive, the bathroom had a rainfall shower and a soaking tub, and the walk-in closet was already filled with designer clothes Vincent had ordered for her. Rosalie touched one of the silk dresses and then turned to Patricia. "Could someone take these back?" "I have my own clothes." Patricia looked confused but nodded. That night, Vincent couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the woman down the hall who seemed completely unmoved by everything he'd offered her. In his experience, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. But Rosalie had looked at his mansion the same way she'd look at any ordinary house. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen at dawn, making simple toast and tea, ignoring the professional chef who stood ready to prepare anything she wanted. "You don't have to make your own breakfast," Vincent said, pouring himself coffee. "I prefer to," Rosalie replied. "I'll be leaving for the bookshop soon." "You're actually going to keep working?" Vincent was surprised, even though it had been part of their agreement. "Did you think I was joking?" Rosalie met his eyes. "1 year, Vincent. Then I go back to my real life. This," she gestured around the expensive kitchen, "isn't real." As she left, Vincent stood alone in his perfect house and felt, for the first time in years, truly unsettled. Rosalie Bennett was not going to be easy to figure out, and somehow that made her the most dangerous opponent he'd ever faced. Because for the first time, Vincent realized he might actually lose. The first month of marriage felt like a cold war. Vincent would leave for his office before dawn, spend 14 hours making deals that added more zeros to his fortune, and return to find Rosalie already asleep. On weekends, she disappeared to her bookshop, leaving him alone in his massive house that suddenly felt more like a museum than a home. Vincent told himself he was fine with this arrangement. The bet required them to stay married, not to actually live like a real couple. But something about Rosalie's complete disinterest in his life bothered him more than he wanted to admit. One evening, he decided to assert some control over the situation. When Rosalie came home from the bookshop, he was waiting in the living room with a tablet in his hand. "We need to talk about your schedule," Vincent said without looking up from his screen. "I have several business dinners and charity events coming up. You'll need to attend as my wife. I've hired a stylist to help you prepare." Rosalie set down her bag slowly. "I have commitments at the bookshop. Thursday nights, I teach reading to adults who never learned properly. Saturday mornings are story time for children. I can't just cancel these things. You're my wife now," Vincent replied, finally meeting her eyes. "People expect to see us together? This was part of our arrangement." "No," Rosalie said firmly. The arrangement was that I would attend events when necessary, but my work continues. Those people depend on me, Vincent. They're not just numbers on a schedule. They're real human beings with real needs. Vincent felt his jaw tighten. He was used to people following his orders, bending to his will. I'm offering you a world most people would kill for. The least you can do is show some gratitude? Gratitude? Rosalie's voice remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. For what? A big house I didn't ask for? Clothes I won't wear? You think those things matter to me? Then what does matter to you? Vincent demanded, standing up. For the first time, he genuinely wanted to know. Rosalie picked up her bag and headed toward the stairs. If you have to ask that question, Vincent, then you'll never understand the answer. She left him standing there, angry and confused. Vincent Hayes had built an empire by understanding what people wanted and using it to his advantage. But Rosalie Bennett was a puzzle he couldn't solve. The next week, Vincent found himself doing something he'd never done before. He left work early and drove to the old quarter of the city where Rosalie's bookshop stood. He parked across the street and watched through the window. Inside, Rosalie was sitting in a circle with 5 children, ranging in age from about 6 to 10. She held a picture book and read with such animation that the children were completely captivated. When she did different voices for the characters, they giggled with pure joy. One little girl with glasses kept raising her hand to ask questions, and Rosalie answered each one with patience and enthusiasm. Vincent watched for over an hour. He saw how Rosalie remembered each child's name, how she encouraged the shy ones and gently redirected the restless ones. When story time ended, she gave each child a bookmark she'd made by hand. The parents who came to pick up their children thanked her warmly, and it was clear they genuinely cared about her. This wasn't the transactional world Vincent knew. There was no profit here, no strategic advantage. Rosalie did this because she believed in it, because she wanted to make a difference in these children's lives. Something about witnessing this moment made Vincent feel hollow inside, like he'd been missing something essential his entire life. He returned to the bookshop the following Thursday evening. This time, he watched Rosalie teach 3 adults how to read. One was an older man who'd worked construction his whole life and never had the chance to learn. Another was a young woman who'd dropped out of school to care for her sick mother. The third was a middle-aged man who'd hidden his inability to read for decades. Vincent saw the way these adults struggled with simple words, the shame in their eyes when they made mistakes. But Rosalie never made them feel foolish. She celebrated every small victory, every letter they recognized, every word they managed to sound out. By the end of the session, the construction worker was reading a full sentence, and his eyes were wet with tears. I can read my granddaughter's birthday card now, he told Rosalie, his voice breaking. Thank you don't seem like enough. Rosalie hugged him. You did the work, Thomas. I just showed you the way. Vincent left before she could see him. He drove home in silence, his mind racing. He'd spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth and power, believing that success was measured in dollars and dominance. But he'd just witnessed something worth more than any deal he'd ever made. That weekend, Vincent was working in his home office when he heard music coming from the kitchen. He found Rosalie baking cookies, flour dusting her cheeks, humming along to an old song playing from her phone. What are you doing? He asked from the doorway. Making cookies for the children's reading group, she replied without looking up. It's Emma's birthday tomorrow. She's turning 8. Vincent watched her work, the simple domestic scene so foreign to his usual environment. You know their birthdays? Of course, Rosalie said, finally glancing at him. When you care about people, you remember the details that matter to them. Something about the way she said it felt like an accusation. Vincent thought about his employees, hundreds of people whose names he barely knew. He thought about the business partners he'd worked with for years, people whose personal lives remained complete mysteries to him. Can I help? The words came out before he could stop them. Rosalie looked surprised but handed him a cookie cutter. Make sure they're all the same thickness. The children notice if someone gets a bigger cookie. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of cookie cutters and the soft music. Vincent found the simple task strangely soothing. There were no emails to answer, no deals to negotiate, just the straightforward goal of making cookies that would bring joy to a child. Tell me about Emma, Vincent said suddenly. Rosalie paused, studying him as if trying to determine if he was genuinely interested. She lives with her grandmother because her parents are dealing with addiction. She's incredibly bright but struggles with confidence. Last week, she read an entire chapter book by herself for the first time. Her grandmother cried when Emma told her, "Why do you do this?" Vincent asked. "The teaching, the time you spend with these people." "You barely make enough money to keep the bookshop running." Rosalie set down her cookie cutter and looked directly at him. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident. We didn't have much money, but she made sure I knew I was loved. She taught me that the richest life isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the people you touch and the kindness you spread. When she got sick, the community rallied around us because she'd spent her whole life helping others." Her eyes grew distant, and Vincent saw pain flash across her face. "Before she died, she made me promise to keep that legacy alive, to remember that every person matters, regardless of their social status or wealth. So that's what I do. I give people the gift of stories, of reading, of knowing that someone believes in them." Vincent felt something shift in his chest. He'd never had anyone teach him those lessons. His parents had been wealthy but distant, more interested in social status than in raising a son. He'd learned early that affection was transactional, that people only valued you for what you could give them. "That must have been difficult," he said quietly. "Losing your grandmother." "It was 3 years ago," Rosalie replied, her voice soft. "But I still talk to her sometimes. I think she'd be disappointed in the world we've built, where people are valued for their money instead of their character." The words hung in the air between them, and Vincent knew she was talking about him, about the life he'd built, the empire he'd created by treating people as resources rather than human beings. That night, Vincent couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Rosalie's words, about the children in the bookshop, about Thomas learning to read at 65 years old. He thought about all the neighborhoods he'd bought and demolished to build his towers, about the small businesses he'd crushed to expand his empire. He'd never considered the human cost of his success. The next morning, he surprised himself by asking Rosalie if he could come to the bookshop. "Why?" she asked suspiciously. "I want to understand," he said simply. "I want to see what matters to you." Rosalie studied him for a long moment. "All right, but you follow my rules there. You're not the boss. You're just another volunteer," Vincent agreed, having no idea that this decision would change everything. As he followed Rosalie to her bookshop that day, he was walking toward a transformation he couldn't yet imagine. The man who'd built an empire on power and profit was about to discover what it meant to build a life on purpose and love. Vincent spent the next 3 months volunteering at the bookshop every chance he got. He read stories to children, helped organize the shelves, and even started teaching basic computer skills to adults who wanted to learn. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely useful in a way that had nothing to do with money or power. The children adored him, especially when he did silly voices for the characters in stories. The adults respected him because he treated them as equals, never talking down or rushing them. And through it all, Vincent found himself watching Rosalie, noticing the way she smiled when someone had a breakthrough, the gentle way she corrected mistakes, the fierce love she had for her community. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him one Saturday morning as he watched her dance with Emma to celebrate the girl finishing her first chapter book. Rosalie's joy was pure and unfiltered, and Vincent wanted nothing more than to be part of that world forever. But he also knew he didn't deserve her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One evening as they drove home from the bookshop together, Vincent finally gathered the courage to tell her what was in his heart. "Rosalie, I need to tell you something," he began, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "These past few months have changed me." "You've changed me." "I know this started as a business arrangement, but I've fallen in love with you." Rosalie was quiet for a long moment. When Vincent glanced at her, he saw tears streaming down her face. "But they weren't tears of joy." "Pull over," she said, her voice breaking. Vincent pulled into an empty parking lot, his heart pounding. "Rosalie, what's wrong?" She turned to face him, and the pain in her eyes made him feel like he'd been stabbed. "You want to know why I really agreed to marry you?" "It wasn't for the money, Vincent. I would have done it for free." "I don't understand," Vincent said, confusion mixing with fear. 3 years ago, your company bought the East District. Do you remember that deal? Rosalie's voice was steady but filled with emotion. You demolished 3 blocks of old buildings to put up your luxury apartments. You displaced dozens of families, destroyed small businesses that had been there for generations. Vincent felt cold dread spreading through his chest. Rosalie, my grandmother lived in that neighborhood, she continued, tears flowing freely now. She'd lived in the same apartment for 40 years. All her friends were there, her whole community. When your company forced everyone out, she tried to fight it. She organized protests, went to city council meetings, did everything she could to save her home. Oh, God, Vincent whispered, the pieces finally coming together. The stress of losing everything broke her, Rosalie said, her voice cracking. She had a heart attack 6 months after you demolished those buildings. The doctor said it was brought on by chronic stress and depression. My grandmother died because you decided that neighborhood wasn't valuable enough to preserve. Vincent felt like he couldn't breathe. The weight of what he'd done, the casual cruelty of his business decision, crashed over him like a wave. Rosalie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never thought about the people. I just saw numbers and profit margins. That's exactly the problem, Rosalie said, wiping her tears. You never thought about the people. We were just obstacles to your success. When Derek told me about the bet, I saw my chance. I wanted to understand the man who destroyed my family. I wanted to see if you were just a monster or if there was something human underneath all that wealth and power. And what did you find? Vincent asked, though he was terrified of the answer. Rosalie looked at him with eyes full of conflict. I found that you're capable of change. I've watched you transform over these months. The way you are with the children, the patience you show the adults learning to read, the genuine care you've started to develop for people. That's not the same man who demolished my grandmother's neighborhood without a second thought. But you can't forgive me, Vincent said. Understanding the truth in her silence, I don't know if I can, Rosalie admitted. Part of me wants to because I've seen who you're becoming. But another part of me looks at you and sees the man responsible for my grandmother's death. I'm so conflicted, Vincent, because against all logic and reason, I think I'm falling in love with you too. And that makes me feel like I'm betraying her memory. They sat in silence, both crying, both broken by the truth that had finally come to light. Vincent had never felt pain like this. He'd hurt the woman he loved in the worst possible way, long before he even knew she existed. The next day, Vincent called an emergency meeting with his board of directors. He announced that the company would be redirecting $10 million to rebuild affordable housing in the East District. He established a fund to help displaced families return to their communities. He personally apologized in a press conference for the harm his business practices had caused. Derek called him furious. Have you lost your mind? You're throwing away everything we built. And for what? For her? Keep the money from the bet, Vincent said calmly. I don't want it. This was never about winning. I was the one who lost, Derek. I lost my humanity somewhere along the way. Rosalie helped me find it again. You're weak, Derek spat. She's made you weak. No, Vincent replied. She's made me strong enough to admit I was wrong. There's a difference. The rebuilding project took months. Vincent personally oversaw every detail, making sure the new buildings honored the character of the old neighborhood. He met with former residents, listened to their stories, and tried in some small way to make amends for what he'd taken from them. Rosalie watched from a distance. She attended community meetings, saw Vincent working alongside construction crews, noticed how he remembered people's names and asked about their families. The change in him was real, but she still struggled with forgiveness. As the 1-year anniversary of their marriage approached, Vincent knew he had to give Rosalie her freedom. He found her at the bookshop one evening, reading to a group of children who'd grown to love them both. After the children left, Vincent took Rosalie's hands in his. The year is almost up. I know you plan to leave and I'll respect that decision. But I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest gift of my life. You showed me what it means to be human. You taught me that wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Rosalie's eyes filled with tears. Vincent, I've been so angry at you for so long, but watching you change, seeing the genuine effort you've made to be better, to help the community you hurt. My grandmother always said that the true measure of a person isn't their mistakes, but what they do after making them. What are you saying? Vincent asked, hope and fear warring in his chest. I'm saying that I forgive you, Rosalie whispered. And I'm saying that I love you. Not the man you were, but the man you've become. The man who reads to children, who treats everyone with kindness, who's trying to make the world better instead of just profiting from it. Vincent pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as years of pain and guilt finally began to heal. Will you stay married to me? Not because of a bet or a contract, but because you choose to? Yes, Rosalie said, laughing through her tears. But we're keeping the bookshop. And you're still volunteering every Saturday. I wouldn't have it any other way, Vincent replied, kissing her softly. 1 year later, Vincent and Rosalie stood together in the newly rebuilt East District, cutting the ribbon on a community center named after Rosalie's grandmother. The building housed a library, a reading program, and spaces for local businesses. Vincent had sold most of his luxury properties and simplified his life. He still ran his company, but with a new focus on ethical practices and community investment. And every morning, he woke up next to the woman who'd saved him from himself. Do you think she would have forgiven me? Vincent asked Rosalie as they watched families enter the community center. Rosalie squeezed his hand. My grandmother always said that love has the power to transform even the hardest hearts. I think she'd be proud of the man you've become. I know I am. As the sun set over the neighborhood that had been destroyed and reborn, Vincent realized that true wealth wasn't measured in money or power. It was measured in love, in community, in the lives you touched and the people you helped. He'd started this journey as a millionaire who married a woman as a joke, but he'd ended it as a man who'd found his humanity and the love of his life. And that transformation had shocked not just the world, but Vincent himself most of all. The end.